alien invasion, thwarted by human guerrilla tactics. The orbital rods fell like celestial javelins, each one a white-hot pencil stroke across the sky. Commander Tijar watched from his command dais as the first impact blossomed into a sphere of superheated glass and vaporized concrete. New Angels, coastal jewel of the Western Territories, peeled open like overripe fruit. Compliance window, 8 hours, his tactical officer chittered, mandibles clicking satisfaction against the ambient hum of the flagship's war heart. Urban substrate indicates optimal pacification parameters. Tijar's secondary arms adjusted his ceremonial war traces with precise ritual movements. The humans below would learn the mathematics of submission. His thorax vibrated with anticipation. This would be another clean extraction, another species added to the hegemony's vast inventory of compliant worlds. The strike doctrine demanded nothing less than surgical precision. Steam rose from the impact craters like prayers to dying gods. Glass dust hung in the air, catching light from secondary fires that painted the dawn sky amber and crimson. The city's skyline looked like broken teeth against the morning horizon. 3 kilometers beneath the surface, Rae Nakamura pressed her back against crumbling subway tile and counted heartbeats. The shockwave had rattled loose teeth from their sockets. Blood ran warm down her chin, copper salt tang mixing with the taste of pulverized concrete. Around her, 17 civilians huddled in the maintenance alcove, office workers still clutching briefcases. A barista with coffee burns up her arms. An old man whose hearing aids squealed feedback against the ambient electrical chaos. "Movement," whispered Kowalski, her second. His rifle barrel tracked something through the station's shattered entrance. "Big mechanicals, 6 units, maybe 7. Rae felt her pulse hammer against her throat. The aliens had landed faster than anyone predicted. No time for evacuation protocols or emergency broadcasts, just the immediate brutal arithmetic of survival. She checked her gear. 3 thermite charges, a stolen monofilament wire, and enough spite to choke a battleship. The first mech descended through the station entrance on hydraulic stilts, its chassis gleaming like polished bone. Sensor arrays swept the platform in methodical arcs. Rae caught the scent of ozone and heated metal, the machine's reactor cycling through combat parameters. "Drain charges," she sub-vocalized into her throat mic. Her team had spent the last 6 months rigging every major intersection with improvised explosives. Urban warfare doctrine called it preparation of the battlefield. Rae called it making the bastards bleed for every meter. Tijar's tactical display showed green indicators across the assault grid. His hunter-killer teams were proceeding according to doctrine: establish perimeter control, neutralize armed resistance, commence population sorting. The humans would capitulate within the prescribed timeframe. They always did. Contact crackled through the command channel. Station Delta 7, indigenous combatants. The transmission cut to static. Tijar's compound eyes tracked the tactical feed as Hunter-Killer 7's icon shifted from green to amber to funeral black. 14 seconds from first contact to signal loss. His mandibles clicked irritation. "Expand the search grid," he ordered. "Nonlinear adversary, decentralized doctrine probable." The mech stepped directly over the concealed thermite charge. Rae waited until its weight settled fully onto the drain grating, then squeezed the detonator. The explosion erupted upward through the maintenance shaft, a white-hot column of molten steel and aluminum oxide that punched through the machine's pelvic actuators and climbed into its thoracic cavity. Metal screamed. Hydraulic lines ruptured in arterial sprays of viscous fluid. The mech toppled sideways, crushing a newsstand into splinters and sparks. Emergency klaxons wailed as its reactor went into emergency shutdown. Now Rae barked. Her team boiled out of concealment like hornets from a kicked nest. Sledgehammers rang against armor plating. Kowalski jammed a pry bar into a joint seal and levered until servos shrieked. The monofilament wire whispered through cables and sensor feeds with surgical precision. The second mech pivoted toward them, weapon arms cycling to combat stance. Rae dove behind a concrete pillar as particle beams carved smoking furrows through the platform. She could taste the ionization in the air, metallic and sharp, like biting down on aluminum foil. EMP, she called. Hendricks armed the mine and rolled it toward the advancing machine. The electromagnetic pulse burst outward in an invisible sphere, shorting gyroscopic stabilizers and scrambling targeting algorithms. The mech staggered like a drunk, weapon arms swinging wildly. They fell on it with crowbars in fury. Rae found a sensor cluster and drove her knife into the junction box until sparks died and the red targeting beam winked out. Around her, civilians who'd never held weapons learned the geometry of violence, how to jam a tire iron into an actuator housing, where to hit armor plating so it buckled and split. The third mech never made it off the platform. They dragged rebar across the landing zone during the night's preparation, creating a field of steel spikes that punched through landing struts and stability pods. It crashed into the debris and thrashed like a speared fish, hydraulics bleeding rainbow fluid across broken concrete. Tijar's tactical board showed a spreading pattern of amber warnings. 3 hunter-killer units lost contact. 2 more reporting combat damage. The humans weren't collapsing into orderly surrender. They were fighting back with primitive but effective countermeasures. Casualty assessment, he demanded. 17 dead, 43 wounded, his logistics officer replied. Infrastructure damage exceeds projected parameters by factor 3.7. Tijar's claws carved shallow gouges in his command throne's armrest. The mathematics were wrong. Humans weren't supposed to adapt this quickly. His secondary stomach churned with something that might have been doubt. Rae wiped mech fluid from her hands with a strip of torn fabric. The subway platform looked like a scrapyard after a tornado, twisted metal, sparking electronics, and the acrid smell of burned circuitry hanging in the air like incense. The civilians had dragged the wounded behind improvised barricades, and someone had found a medical kit in a maintenance locker. Count, she ordered, checking her team. All present, Kowalski reported. Hendricks has a dislocated shoulder. Martinez took shrapnel in the leg, but he can move. Ammunition. 2 thermite charges remaining. Half a dozen EMP mines. Plenty of improvised ordnance. Rae nodded. They'd hurt the aliens, but this was just the opening move. She pulled out a salvaged tablet and scrolled through the tactical network reports flooding in from across the city. The invaders were establishing checkpoints, deploying hunter-killer patrols, setting up the infrastructure of occupation. Standard doctrine for a technologically superior force. They'll adapt, she said, more to herself than the team. Next wave will have countermeasures for our tricks. We need to stay ahead of their learning curve. Above them, the city burned. But in the tunnels beneath the streets, in the maintenance shafts and service corridors, a different kind of war was beginning. The kind where intimate knowledge of terrain mattered more than superior firepower, where desperation and ingenuity could level the technological playing field. Tijar studied the tactical projections with growing unease. The humans had destroyed or damaged 30% of his initial hunter-killer deployment using crude but effective improvised weapons. Urban combat doctrine predicted a 95% success rate for the opening phase. Instead, his forces were bogged down in a grinding street-by-street advance that consumed resources at an alarming rate. Deploy shear drones for vertical reconnaissance, he ordered. If they're using tunnel systems, we'll flush them with aerial hunters. The tactical officer acknowledged with a click of mandibles. Within minutes, the first wave of airborne killers descended toward the city. Each drone carried thermal imaging arrays, motion detectors, and enough firepower to level a city block. They would root out the human resistance cells like parasites from wounded flesh. Rae led her team through the maintenance tunnels beneath Fifth Avenue, moving by memory and instinct through passages that hadn't seen daylight in decades. The air was thick with dust and the smell of old oil, and their footsteps echoed in the confined space despite their efforts at stealth. Behind them, the civilians followed in single file, trusting their lives to a woman they'd known for less than 6 hours. "Heat signatures incoming," Martinez whispered, checking his thermal scanner. "Aerial hunters, 6 contacts, altitude dropping." "Mirror Alley," Rae replied. They'd prepared for this contingency, a stretch of 13th Street lined with reflective surfaces from a dozen storefronts. The thermal shadows would confuse infrared targeting, and the confined space would limit the drone's maneuverability. They emerged from the subway entrance into chaos. The street was a canyon of broken glass and twisted metal. Steam rose from impact craters where the orbital bombardment had liquefied asphalt and concrete. The air tasted of cordite and melted steel, and somewhere in the distance, air raid sirens wailed like dying animals. The first drone descended through the smoke like a metallic wasp, its rotors whining with predatory hunger. Rae pressed herself against a storefront's shattered window and watched the machine's sensor array sweep the street in methodical patterns, waiting, timing the approach. "Heat signature puppets," she subvocalized. Her team activated the thermal decoys, small devices that mimicked human body heat using chemical heating elements. The drone's sensors locked onto the signatures and fired, sending missiles streaking toward empty storefronts and abandoned vehicles. The confined space turned into a death trap for the attacking machines. Missiles ricocheted off mirrored surfaces, their guidance systems confused by multiple heat sources and reflected infrared signatures. One drone took a direct hit from its wingman's ordnance and spiraled into the street, rotors chewing concrete into powder. Rae armed a thermite grenade and hurled it at the closest machine. The white-hot chemical reaction melted through the drone's armored housing like butter, and it crashed into a storefront window in a shower of sparks and molten metal. The other machines tried to climb above the kill zone, but Kowalski was waiting with a jury-rigged EMP launcher. The electromagnetic pulse burst caught 3 drones in its sphere of effect. Their electronics fried instantly, and they tumbled from the sky like poisoned birds. The survivors fled back toward the alien positions, their tactical algorithms recognizing a losing engagement. "Street smells like cordite, burnt oil, and coppery blood," Rae reported into her throat mic. Around her, the team was already collecting salvageable components from the wreckage. Every piece of alien technology was precious, a glimpse into their enemy's capabilities and potential weaknesses. Tijar watched his drone formations retreat with the bitter taste of defeat coating his mandibles. 12 aerial hunters lost to human countermeasures. The mathematical precision of his assault doctrine was crumbling against the brutal improvisations of a desperate enemy. "Analysis," he demanded. "They're using our sensor capabilities against us," the tactical officer replied. "Heat decoys, reflective surfaces, electromagnetic warfare, primitive but effective countermeasures." "Sonic suppressors," Tijar decided. "If they're hiding in tunnels, we'll flush them with harmonic resonance weapons, collapse their hiding places." But even as he gave the order, Tijar felt uncertainty gnawing at the edges of his confidence. Each human adaptation spawned new complications, new variables to account for. The clean mathematical certainty of conquest was becoming a chaotic equation with too many unknowns. The sonic suppressors arrived at dawn, delivered by heavy transport pods that cratered the streets with their landing. Each weapon was a cathedral of alien engineering crystalline resonance chambers wrapped in biometallic housing that hummed with subsonic threat. Tijar observed the deployment from his command post, mandibles clicking satisfaction, as the harmonic weapons locked onto subterranean targets. "Initiate resonance cascade," he ordered. The suppressors activated with a sound like the Earth's bones breaking, sending destructive frequencies deep into the city's underground infrastructure. Tunnel walls would crack and collapse. Hiding humans would be crushed or driven to the surface where his hunter-killers waited. 3 kilometers below, Rae felt the vibrations climbing through the maintenance tunnel's concrete walls. The frequency was wrong, too deep, too purposeful to be natural. Emergency lighting flickered and died as the resonance built to destructive intensity. "Storm drains," she barked, leading her people deeper into the city's hidden arteries. The tunnels here were older, carved from living rock during the city's founding generations. They might survive what was coming. Might. The first harmonic pulse hit like a physical blow. Concrete dust rained from the ceiling as stress fractures spiderwebbed through the walls. Behind them, newer tunnels collapsed in cascading avalanches of debris and shattered pipe. The sound was indescribable, the death scream of a buried city. But Rae had studied the aliens' technological patterns. Everything they built followed harmonic principles, resonance chambers tuned to specific frequencies, which meant those frequencies could be turned back on them. Her team had spent days mapping the storm drain system, finding the acoustical sweet spots where sound waves would focus and amplify. "Wave guides," she gasped, fighting to be heard over the harmonic assault. They reached a junction where 6 drainage tunnels converged, a natural acoustic focusing chamber. Here, the aliens' own weapons would become instruments of their destruction. Kowalski and Martinez worked with desperate efficiency, placing explosive charges at calculated intervals along the tunnel walls. The shaped charges would direct the sonic energy upward through the drainage system, creating a standing wave pattern that would resonate through the suppressor's own crystalline chambers. The detonation was perfectly timed, synchronized with the next harmonic pulse from above. The explosion channeled the destructive frequency back through the storm system, amplifying it through the tunnel network until it emerged at street level with devastating force. Above ground, the nearest sonic suppressor began to vibrate at its resonant frequency. Crystalline matrices that had been designed to project destruction now absorbed it, building harmonic stress beyond their engineered tolerances. The weapon shrieked like a dying god as its internal structures began to fail. Tijar watched in horrified fascination as his suppressor tore itself apart from the inside. Resonance chambers cracked and shattered, releasing stored harmonic energy in a catastrophic cascade failure. The explosion atomized a 3-block radius, leaving nothing but a perfectly spherical crater filled with glowing plasma. "Report," he demanded, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Suppressor 7 has suffered catastrophic failure. Cause unknown. Recommend immediate shutdown of remaining units pending technical analysis." Tijar's claws carved deeper furrows in his command throne. The humans were learning too quickly, adapting to each new weapon with increasingly sophisticated countermeasures. This wasn't supposed to happen. The mathematical models were clear inferior species didn't evolve tactically during active combat operations. In the tunnels below, Rae allowed herself a moment of fierce satisfaction. One suppressor destroyed, but she could hear the others still operating, chewing through the city's underground infrastructure with methodical precision. Her people were tired, wounded, running low on supplies. They needed something more than defensive victories. "We need to take the fight to them," she said, studying the tactical displays on her salvaged tablet. Intelligence reports showed a major substation 6 blocks north, the power hub that fed the aliens' command network. If they could capture it, they might be able to decode the enemy's communication protocols. "Suicide run," Kowalski observed. "Maybe, but we're dying by inches down here. Better to die doing something that matters." The substation raid required everything they'd learned about urban warfare. They moved through service corridors and maintenance shafts, avoiding the hunter-killer patrols that swept the streets with methodical precision. The building itself was a fortress of alien engineering, organic curves, and crystalline growths that pulsed with bioluminescent energy. Sentries stood guard at regular intervals, their armor gleaming under sodium lights. Rae counted 12 visible guards, plus unknown numbers inside the facility. The odds were impossible, but impossible was becoming their specialty. They went in fast and quiet, using the darkness between streetlights to mask their approach. Martinez took the first sentry with a monofilament garrote that parted alien chitin like tissue paper. Kowalski disabled the second with an EMP pulse that fried its nervous system through the armor's power feeds. The substation's interior hummed with electrical energy transformers and power distribution equipment arranged in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The air tasted of ozone and copper, and the floor thrummed with subsonic vibrations that made their bones ache. Rae found what she was looking for: a command terminal integrated into the power distribution network. The interface was alien, but electrical principles were universal. She began the delicate work of tapping into the communication stream, her fingers flying over unfamiliar controls as alerts began to sound throughout the facility. The first wave of guards hit them as she was downloading the data. Particle beams carved smoking trenches through concrete walls. Her team returned fire with salvaged weapons and improvised explosives, turning the substation into a war zone of sparks and screaming metal. Tijar arrived to find his facility in ruins, his guards dead or dying in pools of luminescent ichor. The humans had vanished into the city's hidden arteries, leaving behind only destruction and a data breach that compromised 17 critical communication nodes. He stood in the wreckage of his certainty, studying the tactical displays that showed the mathematical progression of his defeat. Each human adaptation spawned new complications. Each victory they achieved expanded their capabilities. The clean arithmetic of conquest had become a chaotic equation with no solution. For the first time since the invasion began, Commander Tijar felt the alien emotion his species called jektai, the hollow fear that came when perfect order encountered perfect chaos. The stolen data painted a picture of alien doctrine that Rae found both fascinating and terrifying. She studied the decrypted files in the relative safety of an abandoned parking garage, her team maintaining security while she parsed alien tactical philosophy into actionable intelligence. Fleet doctrine, she muttered, highlighting key passages in the command protocols. They use consensus voting before deploying planet crackers, requires authenticated casualty reports from ground commanders, democratic warships, who knew? The implications were staggering. The aliens' technological superiority was balanced by bureaucratic limitations that could be exploited. If she could feed false data into their command network, she might be able to manipulate their strategic decision-making process. Spoofable, Kowalski observed, reading over her shoulder. If we can authenticate the casualty streams. Already working on it, Rae replied, fingers dancing over the tablet's interface. The aliens used biometric authentication tied to their commander's neural patterns complex, but not impossible to duplicate with the right equipment and sufficient desperation. Tijar paced his command deck like a caged predator, studying tactical reports that painted an increasingly grim picture of the ground campaign. Human resistance was intensifying rather than collapsing. His forces were sustaining unacceptable casualty rates against an enemy that seemed to learn and adapt with each engagement. Purity purge, he decided, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Scorched earth protocol. Eliminate civilian population centers to deny the resistance operational cover. His officers clicked mandibles in acknowledgement, but Tijar caught the subtle body language that indicated unease. Purity purges were reserved for the most intractable resistance movements, genocidal tactics that violated the hegemony's own codes of ethical warfare. But these humans were forcing his claws with their relentless adaptation. The first civilian districts died in fires that could be seen from orbit. Particle beams carved through apartment blocks with surgical precision, turning homes into funeral pyres. Tijar watched the destruction from his command post and felt his stomach acids churning with something that might have been shame. But the purges only made the resistance more desperate, more vicious in their countermeasures. Where there had been 17 active cells, now there were 43. Where there had been crude improvised weapons, now there were sophisticated sabotage operations that struck at his logistics trains and communication networks. Rae felt the city burning around her like a fever in her bones. The aliens' scorched earth tactics had claimed thousands of lives, but they'd also provided her with exactly the data she needed. She fed the casualty reports into her spoofing algorithm, carefully crafting false authentication codes that would pass automated verification systems. Catastrophic overextension, she broadcast on the alien command frequencies, her voice filtered through vocal synthesis software that mimicked Tijar's neural patterns. Ground forces require immediate tactical withdrawal. Resistance capabilities exceed projected parameters. The false reports proliferated through the fleet's decision-making matrix like a virus. Automated systems flagged the casualty rates as unsustainable. Strategic planning algorithms recommended immediate disengagement. The democratic protocols that were meant to prevent genocide began voting for retreat. Tijar watched his command authority dissolve in real time as the fleet's consensus mechanisms turned against him. Officers who had followed his orders without question began voicing doubts about the campaign's viability. His own tactical assessments were being overruled by fabricated data that painted his forces as catastrophically overextended. "Verify authentication protocols," he ordered, but his technical staff reported that all casualty streams carried valid biometric signatures. The humans had somehow penetrated his most secure communication networks and were feeding poison into his command structure. For the first time since the invasion began, Tijar felt the cold touch of genuine fear. Not the tactical concern that came with unexpected resistance, but the existential terror of losing control over forces he could no longer trust or command. The urban warfare had transformed the city into a maze of rubble and improvised fortifications. Rae led her expanded brigade through the skeletal remains of what had once been downtown, now a landscape of twisted metal and shattered concrete that provided perfect cover for guerrilla operations. They'd captured a crawler foundry 3 nights earlier, a mobile manufacturing unit that the aliens used to produce equipment in the field. Her engineers had spent 72 hours converting it into a weapons factory, welders showering sparks as they plated salvaged buses into armored battering rams. "Diesel and hate," Martinez grinned, patting the flank of their improvised war machine. The engines coughed black smoke into the morning air, retrofitted power plants jury-rigged to push tons of armored steel through whatever obstacles the aliens placed in their path. Their target was the orbital uplink tower, a spire of alien engineering that stretched toward the sky like an accusing finger. It was the communication hub that linked Tijar to his fleet, the nerve center through which all tactical data flowed. If they could reach the uplink chamber and inject her viral payload directly into the transmission system, they could complete the deception that would trigger the fleet's withdrawal protocols. The tower was heavily defended. Hunter-killer mechs patrolled its perimeter, their weapon systems cycling through target acquisition patterns. Aerial drones maintained overwatch from elevated positions, ready to call in orbital strikes against any significant threat. It was a fortress designed to be impregnable, which was why Rae intended to drive straight through the front door. The convoy rolled out at dawn, 6 armored buses converted into battering rams, their reinforced hulls bristling with improvised weapons and electromagnetic jammers. Behind them came support vehicles carrying ammunition, medical supplies, and enough thermite charges to level several city blocks. Tijar watched the approaching attack through his tactical displays, his compound eyes tracking the primitive but effective war machines that carved through his defensive perimeter like heated knives through chitin. The humans had learned to turn their industrial infrastructure into weapons of war, transforming civilian vehicles into instruments of destruction. "All units converge on the uplink facility," he ordered, his voice tight with barely contained panic. If they reached the communication hub, if they compromised the fleet interface, the consequences would be catastrophic beyond calculation. The first bus hit the perimeter defenses at 60 kilometers per hour. Reinforced steel met alien armor in a collision that sent shockwaves through the tower's foundation. The vehicle's armored ram punched through the defensive line, clearing a path for the following machines. Hunter-killers converged on the breakthrough, their particle weapons carving through armored plating with surgical precision. But the humans had learned the value of redundancy. Where one vehicle fell, two more took its place, grinding forward over the wreckage of their predecessors. Rae rode in the lead vehicle, her hands gripping the improvised weapon mounts as the world outside dissolved into chaos. Particle beams seared the air around them, leaving trails of ionized atmosphere that made her lungs burn with each breath. The bus shuddered under direct hits, armor plating glowing cherry red from thermal overload. "Elevators are dead," Kowalski reported as they reached the tower's base. Stairwells flooded with defensive measures nanobarbs, according to the scanner. Climbs going to be hand over hand on cable guts. The ascent was a nightmare of physical endurance and mechanical precision. They climbed the tower's exterior using maintenance cables and structural supports, their hands splitting on rough metal as they hauled themselves toward the communication chamber 60 floors above ground level. Behind them, the battle raged through the tower's lower levels. Her remaining forces held the lobby against waves of alien reinforcements, buying time with blood and ammunition. The sound of combat filtered up through the structure, the whine of particle weapons, the crash of explosives, the screams of humans and aliens dying together in intimate violence. Tijar arrived at the tower's base to find his defenses collapsing. Human forces had established a beachhead in the facility's lower levels, and their improvised weapons were proving devastatingly effective in close-quarters combat. He gathered his personal guard, 12 elite warriors in powered armor, and began the ascent to the communication chamber. Rae reached the uplink room as the sun reached its zenith, her hands bloody from the climb and her lungs burning with exhaustion. The chamber was a cathedral of alien technology, holographic displays floating in midair, data streams flowing like luminous rivers through crystalline processors. At the center of it all, the quantum communication array that linked this tower to the fleet above. She connected her tablet to the primary data trunk and began uploading the viral payload, carefully crafted false reports that would trigger the fleet's democratic withdrawal protocols. Progress bars crawled across the screen as terabytes of fabricated intelligence flowed into the alien communication network. Tijar burst into the chamber as the upload reached 97% completion. His powered armor gleamed like polished bone in the chamber's blue illumination, weapon systems already cycling to combat configuration. His mandibles clicked fury as he recognized the scope of the human deception. "Step away from the interface," he commanded, his voice carrying harmonic overtones of absolute authority. Rae turned to face him, one hand still connected to the data port. "Upload at 98%, she replied calmly. "Too late to stop it now." Tijar's response was a particle beam that carved a smoking trench through the floor where she'd been standing a moment before. But Rae had spent months learning the timing of alien weapons, and she rolled aside as the beam passed through empty space. The chamber erupted into close-quarters combat as Rae's surviving team members poured through the access hatch. Human desperation met alien technology in a ballet of violence that shattered display screens and sent sparks cascading from damaged systems. Kowalski died first, a monofilament blade parting his torso at the waist. Martinez lasted longer, trading shots with an alien warrior until a particle beam cooked him in his own armor. But their sacrifice bought Rae the seconds she needed to complete the upload. "Upload complete," her tablet announced as alien weapons fire began tearing the communication chamber apart. The viral payload was already propagating through the fleet's command networks, feeding false data to the democratic protocols that governed strategic decision-making. Tijar felt his command authority evaporating in real time as the fabricated reports triggered automatic withdrawal sequences. Fleet commanders who had followed his orders without question were now voting for immediate disengagement. The humans had turned his own people's democratic instincts against them. The false quorum data cascaded through the fleet's decision matrix like digital wildfire. Command strata that had supported the invasion began filing no-confidence votes as casualty projections exceeded acceptable thresholds. Tijar watched his authority dissolve on the tactical displays, each blinking icon representing another ship commander who had lost faith in the ground campaign. "Auto-recall initiated," his fleet liaison announced, mandibles clicking with barely concealed relief. "Strike platforms repositioning to safe hold orbit. Withdrawal protocols engaging across all operational theaters." Tijar felt the bitter taste of defeat coating his mandibles as he realized the scope of the human deception. They had weaponized his own people's democratic principles, turning the hegemony's ethical safeguards into instruments of tactical withdrawal. It was a stratagem that no military academy had ever contemplated. Rain began falling as the fleet pulled back from orbital bombardment positions. The droplets tasted of metal and ash, washing the dust of war from the city's broken skyline. Rae stood in the ruins of the communication chamber and watched alien ships vanish into the darkness between stars. But Tijar wasn't finished. His personal guard had survived the chamber assault, 12 elite warriors in powered armor, who represented the last vestige of his military authority. If he couldn't complete the conquest, he could at least salvage his honor through single combat with the human who had orchestrated his defeat. The final confrontation took place in the rain-soaked plaza surrounding the orbital tower. Tijar's guard formed a stilted phalanx, their blades gleaming like crescent moons in the uncertain light. They advanced with mechanical precision, powered armor hissing steam as hydraulic systems compensated for the unstable footing. Rae met them with the last of her combat-effective personnel, 17 humans, armed with salvaged weapons, and enough fury to level continents. They charged through the ankle-deep runoff that filled the plaza's broken surfaces, voices raised in wordless battle cries that echoed off shattered buildings. The melee was brutal and intimate. Shotguns barked at point-blank range, their pellets sparking off alien armor but finding joints and soft spots with devastating effect. Bone splintered under improvised clubs. Armor plates screamed as crowbars found leverage points, and human desperation overcame technological superiority. Tijar's monoblade sheared through rebar and human ribs with equal ease, carving arcs of destruction through the chaotic close-quarters battle. But Rae had studied alien combat patterns, had learned the timing of their weapon cycles and the weak points in their powered armor. She jammed a pry bar into the servo notch of his primary weapon arm and levered until the motor howled in mechanical agony. The monoblade wavered as hydraulic pressure dropped, giving her the opening she needed to plant a cable-tied thermite charge against his chest plate. The explosion was muffled but devastating, white-hot chemical fire eating through armor plating and into the organic systems beneath. Tijar staggered backward, his chest cavities smoking from internal combustion. For the first time in his military career, he felt the alien sensation of mortality, the knowledge that death could come to even the most perfectly trained warrior. The phalanx buckled as their commander fell. Human radios crackled with laughter and sobbing, the mixed emotions of soldiers who had achieved the impossible at terrible cost. Rae's pulse hammered against her tongue as she stood over Tijar's cooling corpse, the taste of victory bitter with the knowledge of what it had cost. Tijar's final moments were spent staring at the sky he had owned just hours before. The clouds looked different now, no longer a tactical obstacle to overcome, but simply weather. Rain fell into his compound eyes, washing away the last traces of his certainty. Fleet withdrawal protocol completed with mechanical efficiency, the alien ships vanishing into hyperspace with their tale of human adaptability. The official logs would record doctrine breach adversary adaptation exceeds modeled variance, but the real lesson would take longer to process. Earth's skyline was serrated with destruction, but the streets hummed with generators and stubborn music. Survivors emerged from shelters and tunnels, blinking in sunlight that no longer carried the threat of orbital bombardment. The work of rebuilding would take decades, but humanity had proven something important about itself, that it could learn faster than its enemies could adapt. Rae stood in the quiet spill of a busted storefront, fingers trembling over a salvaged alien visor. No speeches, only a nod to her surviving squad members and a piece of chalk retrieved from the rubble. On the bullet-scarred wall, she wrote 4 words that would become humanity's epitaph for the war. We learned faster. The city breathed like a sleeping beast, its pulse carried through broken streets and shattered buildings. In the tunnels below, maintenance crews worked to restore power and water to neighborhoods that had learned to survive without them. Children played in the ruins, their games incorporating lessons learned during the siege, how to spot alien drones, where to find cover during bombardment, which sounds meant safety and which meant death. The invasion had lasted 18 days. The learning would continue for generations. But humanity had answered the fundamental question that every sapient species eventually faced. What happened when superior technology met superior adaptability? The answer lay written in the ruins of alien certainty and the stubborn persistence of human ingenuity. In the command bunkers buried beneath government buildings, analysts pored over captured alien technology and tactical recordings. The data would inform new doctrines, new weapons, new strategies for the wars that would inevitably come. Because the galaxy had learned something about humanity that it hadn't known before, that humans turned every battleground into a learning laboratory, every defeat into tactical intelligence, every victory into preparation for the next fight. The orbital tower still stood, its alien architecture scarred by battle but structurally intact. Engineers had already begun the work of reverse engineering its communication systems, turning the invader's own technology into humanity's first stepping stone toward the stars. The hegemony had come to Earth expecting easy conquest. Instead, they had given humanity the tools it needed to reach back. As night fell over the city, Rae walked the perimeter one final time, checking security positions and casualty reports with the methodical precision of a professional soldier. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: reconstruction, technological integration, preparation for whatever came next. But tonight, she allowed herself the luxury of satisfaction. They had learned faster, and in the end, that had made all the difference. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story, consider subscribing for more journeys. Share your thoughts in the comments and stay tuned for the next adventure.